The topic is, do you have a problem with anger? Do you? That's the topic this morning. Because so many people are angry and maybe have repressed their anger. They've repressed it for so long, they don't even know where it's still there. And if you've been going through some things or doing some things that you know you shouldn't be doing, listen, there's a God this morning, and you'll find out that He's ready, willing and able to help you with your anger. So without further ado, let me introduce you to my great friend, Mark Griffin. Thank you so much for being here again.
Thank you, Corporal.
Again. And I know you got a word from the Lord on this topic, and we want to hear what God has to say. My brother, take it away.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's great to be with you again, Corval. And what a great topic. What a great question. Do you have a problem with anger? Generally, Canadians are considered to be some of the most friendly and kind people in the world. You wouldn't think we have a problem with anger, and my apologies to anyone who's watching from anywhere else in the world, but Canadians are generally thought to be polite, thoughtful, and courteous. We're well-mannered and considerate. However, we also have a bit of a reputation for being passive-aggressive. There's a suggestion that underneath all of our sorries, we're seething. We're angry. How about you? Do you have a problem with anger? Listen, I don't plan to sit here and speculate or convince you, but as I ask myself a few questions about anger, as I take a look on the inside, I wonder about it myself. Am I angry? How can I know? Through the prophet Jeremiah in the scriptures, the Bible says this: the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can cure it? Or who can fix it? That's a great question. Can we even trust our own assessment? If I was angry, could I just cover it up? Could I lie to myself and convince myself I'm just fine? Absolutely. Recently, I had an eye-opening moment. I had a visit to a doctor, and my doctor was there and another practitioner, and he asked me about a situation in my life because he knows me outside of the doctor's office. And he said, "Mark, how are you doing with that situation?" He asked me a very hard question. He said, "Have you forgiven and moved on?" I pondered it heavily and I just said, "Doc, I'm working on it." But then his next comment really got my attention. He said, "Mark, it's not worth it to hang on to your anger, to not forgive, to be angry." He said, "The medical implications of anger and unforgiveness are devastating." It's true. I mean, there's all kinds of empirical research about how anger can cause a vast array of medical problems and issues. Ultimately, anger can eat you from the inside out. It can destroy you. It can pull you down. So I want you to know I'm not on a witch hunt tonight. Not here to find fault. Not here to point fingers or blame. I'm just hoping to maybe ask the right questions to hopefully flush out some poison to protect our hearts and hopefully save a few lives. So let me ask the question again. Do you have a problem with anger? You know, there's many reasons we can be angry or become angry. Something as simple as being underappreciated. People don't notice all the things that you're doing for them. That can make us angry. Injustice is something we get angry about. Traumatic events can leave us feeling angered, or just maddening memories, little episodes, little things that happened that upset us. Another cause for anger is feeling frustrated or powerless, like we have no control in a situation. Sometimes we get angry because our feelings have been disrespected, or our boundaries or our possessions have been disrespected. Another common cause of anger is grief and pain. We know that one of the steps of grieving is to become angry. Another very common reason for anger is financial stress. That's why a lot of marriages end. It's why a lot of relationships break up. It's financially motivated and people are angry. Another thing that really upsets people are requirements that just overwhelm them, whether it's at work or relational requirements. We can get overwhelmed, especially if those requirements are not negotiated, something we're not aware of, and they're just expectations that hang over us. It can make us angry. You know, there's lots of various reasons why people get angry, but I want to ask you, do you have a problem with anger? When I'm asked that question, my first response is no, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm a good Christian man. I'm not angry. I'm all in control. But then as I dig a little deeper, I think, maybe I am a little on the angry side from time to time. Maybe things happen. Maybe there's issues that I need to dig into. And tonight, as we ask this question, do you have a problem with anger? I want to dig a little deeper with three other thoughts, three other questions. In the simple outline, I want to talk about the anger being faint, the anger being our friend or our foe, and the anger being fixed. First of all, is the anger faint? See, a lot of times anger is very subtle. It's just a little whisper of an emotion that kind of sneaks in on us and can rob us of our joy, of our peace. It can suck the life out of us if we're not careful. And it's so subtle, it's so sneaky. We tend to push it down, we tend to suppress it, try to move on, because who wants to sit around all day just being angry? So is it just a faint little thing? Can it actually be identified, or can we unearth it somehow? Is it hidden? Can it be dragged out into the light? I hope so. There's a song that came out a few years ago in 2012, a pop tune by singer-songwriter John Mayer called Speak for Me. I remember the first time I heard the song, I laughed. The lyrics said this. He said, "I'm not mad about it." He said it again, "I'm not mad about it." He said it a third time, "I'm not mad about it." And then he said, "I'm not that mad about it." And as I heard the lyric, I smiled, I laughed, because I thought, isn't that typical of anger? We think it's not there. It's not there. It's definitely not there. Well, maybe it's there a little bit. And his lyric, his words in his song, really spoke to my heart. I want to just look at a few symptoms of how anger manifests physically. It can actually show up in our bodies, and you might remember these things happening from your earliest days as a little kid, even before you could identify emotions. These are just the physical symptoms. Number one is grinding or clenching your teeth or jaws. We just got puppies in our home. I even see them, cute as they are, if they don't like how things are going, they'll clench their teeth, they'll grind. Another thing that we do, physical sign of anger, is we'll curl our toes or clench our fists or furrow our brow. It's just a tightening that happens when we're angry. Another thing we'll do is we'll just hold our breath, not intentionally, not thinking about it. We'll just stop breathing. That can, of course, lead to the fourth symptom of dizziness. If you're not getting enough oxygen in, your brain isn't functioning the way it should be. You get a little dizzy. Very similar to that, the fifth physical symptom is headaches. Another manifestation is stomach aches. And if the rage really sets in, it's not uncommon for people to tremble or even shake. Accompanying all those quite often is an increased heart rate, and that can eventually lead to feeling hot, especially in the head and in the face, even breaking into a sweat, especially the palms. These are just common physical manifestations. Physical manifestations. You might not be able to identify it yourself, but your body knows when you're angry. Back to our question, do you have a problem with anger? I mean, if you're experiencing those physical symptoms all the time, maybe there is some anger present in your life. Is the anger just there subtly? Is it just there faintly? Not only are there physical symptoms of anger, but there's also emotional symptoms. As I read through this next little list, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a bunch of lists tonight, but quite often identifying symptoms can readily bring things to the surface because you can recognize yourself. And as I read this list of symptoms of anger, the emotional symptoms, I had to tick quite a few boxes on this short list. One of the emotional symptoms is irritability. You know, I don't want to eventually be a grumpy old man. You've probably seen it can swing either way with older folks. They can get sweeter as the years go by. Some of them just get embittered. That irritability, that grouchiness, a lot of times the core of that is anger. Another emotional symptom is rage. Do you find yourself flying off the handle? Do you find yourself losing it? That's a sign you might have an anger issue. Another one you might not think of is the emotion of anxiety, particularly unresolved anger can lead to anxiety. Another emotional symptom that'll come up to the surface if we're angry, quite often people feel overwhelmed. It's like your emotional system is so fixated on anger that if anything else comes your way, a problem, a financial issue, a relationship difficulty, all of a sudden you just feel overwhelmed just with the day-to-day tasks of life because you're putting out so much output, physical, mental, emotional output because you're angry. Not just being overwhelmed, but having trouble getting organized. That feeling of disarray, quite often that's tied into anger. Many folks who struggle with anger have difficulty managing their thoughts. That's a very common byproduct of anger. This next one's a little more extreme. If you ever fantasize about hurting yourself or hurting others, chances are there's anger there. And another very common byproduct of anger is confusion. Not just disarray on the outside, but even in your own mind. Another emotional symptom of anger is having aggressive feelings, a desire to lash out verbally or physically. That's a symptom of anger. The desire to run away, not just fight, as we talked about earlier, that outward manifestation, but fight or flight, that desire to run away, that's often a symptom of anger. And then another very common byproduct of anger is the feelings of sadness or depression because the anger is unresolved, can leave us feeling helpless. And lastly, another emotional byproduct of anger is just feelings of guilt. So, is the anger really very faint, or do any of these things kind of connect with you? Connect the dots. Maybe you've experienced some of those emotions. There's quite a list we've been through with the physical symptoms and then the emotional symptoms, but I want to suggest to you maybe the anger isn't really that faint at all. As we look at this next checklist, there's some visual manifestations of anger that start to show up in how we act. One is a rubbing of the head. If we're angry, it's very common to rub our head, and another one is rubbing the fist with one hand, or maybe just clenching fists or rubbing the... That's a physical manifestation, again, of anger. Another very common one is pacing. Not just a sign of nervousness, but it actually starts to work out of your body, that tension you carry inside. Some people just, I just got to walk, I got to get up, I got to work out this nervous energy. Another one, I'm really guilty of number 4, is getting sarcastic. Oh, really? We just have this propensity to try to laugh things off. We set the opposite tone with sarcasm to just show how ridiculous a situation is. I fall into that one quite often. Another one is losing your sense of humor. Again, that furrowed brow, the crossing of the arms. We can quickly lose our joy, and it's very true what Nehemiah said, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And I'll tell you something, when you lose your joy, it doesn't take long to lose your strength. Another physical outworking of anger is sometimes we'll act in an abusive or an abrasive manner. That can include teasing. Maybe you know some people that their language of love, how they express their affection towards you, is teasing, tormenting. It used to be a bully in the playground when you're kids, but as adults, they can manifest as people making fun of you, teasing you, joking with you in inappropriate ways. Could be there's some anger tucked away deep down inside, and it's just working its way out in abusive or abrasive ways. Another way it can come to the surface is craving a drink or a smoke or other substances that relax you. Really, all these substances are ultimately killing you. But if we're angry, there's something angry on the inside that actually wants to do self-harm, and so we'll reach for substances that folks are abusing because deep down there's anger. I think one of the most obvious manifestations of anger is raising your voice or beginning to yell or scream or cry. That's one of the most common ways that anger manifests. So is the anger faint? As we look at this question, do you have a problem with anger? Is the anger faint? Is it just quiet? Or is it kind of resonating with you that perhaps there is some anger there? Sorry, just indulge me for a couple more minutes here. I want to give you one more list, and then I'm done with the lists for now. There's a number of responses we can have where it's not just an outworking, but the anger can actually begin to impact our character. It can actually begin to impact our personality and who we become on a day-to-day basis. Let me just give you 9 of these quickly. If we internalize the anger, it's easy to become, first of all, hypersensitive to comments or actions or lack of actions. It's just easily offended. That's one of the ways that our personality can be impacted. We just are always offended. Or easily hurt, number 2. That our feelings are easy to bruise, easy to get bothered, very similar to the offense. Thirdly, negativity, just thinking about a person. Did you ever encounter that? Somebody's name is mentioned and all of a sudden the wheels start to spin in really negative ways. That's a sign there could be anger there. Number 4, if you have an inability to let it go, holding on to wounding and frequently talking about it, that's a sign that there might be anger there. We love to get a pat on the back from others that says, "Oh, you poor thing. Yeah, do you know what he did to me? Do you know what she said to me?" And we like to garner sympathy. That's a sign, if we're holding on to wounding and talking about it, trying to get sympathy, that's a sign there's anger. Another manifestation of anger is if we tend to alienate or write people off. Remember when you were in grade 3 or grade 4 and you'd be hanging out in the playground and somebody would say, "Oh, we're not talking." I find it hard to believe that adults hang on to these behaviors of not talking. I'm not talking about a healthy distancing where there's been abuse or pain. I'm talking about just woundedness and anger, where there's been no confrontation, no honest dialogue, or as the scripture says, speaking the truth in love. And we're not talking? I think we can do better than that as adults. Number 6 response of anger is to be non-responsive, to be cool, or to be cold. You know, it's one thing to be cool, but I don't know if you've noticed this, it's only a few degrees difference between being cool and being cold. And I just, for a second here, want to address the Christian audience that might be watching. You know, if your expression of worship is just to fold your hands or cross your arms and look around and check out how everybody else is responding in worship, a lot of times that's motivated by walls that are up in your life. If you have a posture of just openness to God, of responding to God in prayer or in worship or in His presence, that's what we're looking for. That's what God is looking for, a humble, a contrite heart. And if we're non-responsive, maybe there's an anger issue there. Another character or personality way that anger sneaks in is verbally slandering a person. Some people, that's the majority of conversation they have, is talking bad about other people. Imagine that. In general, number 8, rebellion. Like if we're always oppositional, if we're always defiant, if we're always pushing back, anytime your spouse asks you something, or anytime the boss is leaning into you for some results, if you're always pushing back, you gotta check your heart. Are you angry about something? And lastly, if I can borrow a term from the world of psychology here, reaction formation. That's where you become the thing that you hate. It's a defense mechanism in the psychology world where you put up a wall and say, "I'll never be like that," but you end up being like that. So is the anger faint? I don't think so. Because in the end, the angry person usually cares very little for the people they're bitter against. They might be very touchy, they can be ungrateful, they might flatter or criticize others, they might hold grudges, they might display stubbornness or sulkiness, they might be hesitant to help, or they might complain when they're asked to help. They can have extremes of highs and lows and be moody. Or again, they might just have a great sense of humor to cover it all up. So my question for you is, do you have a problem with anger? As I went through those lists, I was like, oh God, help me. As I was studying and preparing for this program, I asked, is the anger faint? No. It's actually very readily identifiable if we'll just be honest with ourselves. So tonight's question, do you have a problem with anger? We first looked at, is the anger faint? No. Quickly, I want to wrap this up by asking, is the anger our friend or our foe? Well, here's a quote regarding anger and negative emotions. This has really helped me. Any negative emotion can be your best friend. It's God's way of identifying areas of our lives that need to be fixed. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul, he had a rough background. He was a murderer. I'm sure he felt guilty. I'm sure he faced sleepless nights. And talking to his friends in what is now modern-day Turkey, he said these words. He said, "Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body." He said, "In your anger, do not sin, and don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, and don't give the devil a foothold." He said that to his friends in Ephesus. So just to summarize, 3 things I see really quickly there. He said, speak truthfully. He said, in your anger, don't sin. And then he said, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. So speak truthfully. And I think if we're going to be honest, we have to say, you know what? I do actually have that emotion of anger from time to time. But the good news is, Paul said, in your anger, don't sin. So there can be a healthy anger. Again, God's way of identifying something isn't right. Your body is responding. Your whole personality, everything in you is rising up to say, it's not fair or it's not right. But it doesn't mean you have to sin. It doesn't mean you have to go too far with your anger. It doesn't mean you have to harbor unforgiveness, because the very next line, the Apostle Paul says, just don't hang on to it. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. Did you know that you can be angry and not sin? Because anger can be this beautiful, healthy emotion that helps you identify injustice or trauma or unhealed memories or frustration or a need for better boundaries or grief that needs attention or pain or stress. You know, if you ignore it, anger can really hurt you physically. It can impact your responses. It can impact your personality and character. It can eat at you like a cancer from the inside out. Do you have a problem with anger? We talked about anger being faint. We talked about anger not being a foe. It can be our friend. And then lastly, can anger be fixed? Definitely. If we'll just be honest about it, if we'll actually admit that we're struggling with this negative emotion. And then secondly, if we can take inventory, maybe take some notes. What am I so angry about? Who got hurt? How much was I hurt? What were the results? It's good to take some notes. And then talk to someone confidentially. Again, not blabbing it, not slandering, not being a blabber, but confidentially talking to someone that you trust, someone that will care about you and pray for you. And then when you've made these notes, when you've talked to somebody, feel the emotion. Don't deny it. Don't try to push it down and say, oh, I don't get angry. I'm more in control than that. Feel your anger. Don't deny it. And here's a vital help, or a vital step, is to invite God's help to forgive. Remember how Jesus taught us to pray in the Lord's Prayer? Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. As there means the exact same way we forgive God, that's how we want you to forgive us. And that's kind of challenging. But if we'll really feel the emotion and then ask for God's help with it, it changes everything. I've talked to many people who've said things to me along this line of, if you knew how bad things were, if you knew how badly I was treated, you would understand. I just can't forgive that person. And I usually respond this way. I say, you know what? You're right. I couldn't forgive. I don't blame you if you can't forgive. The only way to ever forgive is is just to invite God's help, His supernatural ability and strength to help you forgive. And then a couple more steps. You need to identify with your anger. Rather than judging a person and saying, well, they did this and this and this, if you can identify with their mistakes, I'm always the first to say, you know what? I'm not perfect. I've done similar things, maybe not to the same extreme, but they were being selfish, I've been selfish. They were being mean, I've been mean. When you identify, even though it may be totally on a different scale, it helps. And then if we can articulate it, if we can actually say it out loud, if we can write it down in a journal and pray about it, we can work this poison that's inside of us, we can work it out and let God deal with it. And then lastly, change your mind. Again, as you've invited God to help you with anger, there's nothing like being thankful. Your brain is hardwired in such a way that you can't be thankful and angry and complaining at the same time. So here's my challenge to you. If you're trying to get over anger, for the next 30 days, why don't you write down every day one thing that you're thankful about? Every day, write something new that you're thankful about. So after 30 days, you have a list of at least 30 things you're thankful for. I'll tell you, it'll start pushing aside the anger. You should still own it. You should still acknowledge it. You should still deal with it with those simple steps I mentioned. But you'll find you're a lot less angry when you're focusing on being thankful. So that's our question tonight. Do you have a problem with anger? Even if the anger is faint, anger can be our friend and it can be fixed. I hope you're encouraged tonight as we've talked about this question. Do you have a problem with anger? And God help us all as we deal with this heavy, heavy emotion.